as the age of the sexual revolution. And with that sexual revolution and sexual freedom came the advent of more availability of birth control and of abortion. Needless to say, that reduced the number of unintended pregnancies going to term. At the same time, for the first time, pregnant females were allowed to remain in school. So there was a lessening of stigma on single parenthood began at that time period, and all of this resulted in less babies being placed for adoption. At the same time, the reason I've got the Feminine Mystique book up there, at the same time you had second wave feminism. Second wave feminism encouraged young women to continue their education and their careers. That had a very marked effect on delayed childbearing, which had a marked effect on increased infertility. So you've got where you started out with a supply of babies, everything reversed. The scales tipped in the opposite direction, and now you had more infertility, less babies available for adoption. So now we get to the present. This United Nations quote reflects the change in supply and demand that I just mentioned. It says, regrettably, in many cases, the emphasis changed from providing a needy child with a home to providing a needy parent with a child. As a result, a whole industry has grown, generating millions of dollars of revenue a year. Actually, it's billions with a B, not millions. And these figures here are outdated. These are 2008 figures. It's more than that today. You just need to know that it is a huge billion-dollar industry, as is infertility treatments itself is another billion-dollar industry. So, yeah, the average cost is around $40,000. It differs depending on the type of adoption. Now, very interesting. Only these 3 states require licensed adoption agencies. The rest of the states permit totally private adoptions usually. I'm going to read these to you. There are currently thousands of adoption businesses and no guidelines as to who qualifies as an adoption professional. Anyone who decides to be involved in adoption, even a blatant child trader, can legally label himself or herself as an adoption professional. Anyone can hang a shingle or by buying a website. Person who said this is Adam Pertman. He's an adoptive father of 2. He's author of the book Adoption Nation, and most importantly, he's executive director of the Evan B. Donaldson Adoption Institute, which is the premier think tank on adoption in the nation, if not the world, because he deals with international adoption as well. He's the go-to person for the media. And in addition to saying this about the current situation in adoption, he has called it the Wild West. Another person who has recognized this and written about it is Ann Babb, another adoptive parent, PhD. In her book, she points out that adoption agencies are less regulated than nail salons. Now, this is dangerous for anyone who is adopting because there are a lot of scams out there because everything is privatized now. Social workers are still involved, but they're involved as employees of the adoption agencies, which are businesses, and it's important to know that whether it is a for-profit or a not-for-profit agency, not-for-profit is just a tax status, so there's really no difference. They all have a bottom line. They all charge the same fees. They have overhead. They have salaries to pay. So it is a business, and it's very, very loosely regulated. This is kind of the new age of baby brokers that took over during this current time period. This guy's name is Artie Elgart. He was a car part salesman who he and his wife decided to adopt a baby. They came across a lot of difficulties in doing so, and so he decided to apply his marketing skills, his business skills, to the adoption world. And he kind of set the pace for many of the adoption businesses that are still in existence today. He put up huge billboards across the highways in southern Jersey, around the Cherry Hill area, and into Philadelphia. And he still runs his Golden Cradle agency today. So, people adopting today can choose between domestic or international. Within domestic, there's a choice of private infant adoption or going through the state and adopting from foster care. There are between 400,000 and 500,000 children in foster care today. Of those nearly 500,000 children, 100,000 of them could be adopted because they cannot be reunified with their families of origin. However, only about half that amount who could be adopted were adopted last year. The infant adoptions today are generally open adoption, almost all of them. They start out, but there's different levels of open adoption. They start out with the birth mother either online or at an agency looking through resumes of prospective adoptive parents and picking those that she feels comfortable with raising her child. They will meet while she's expecting, so they get to meet one another, they know one another's names, but that's really, sometimes that's called an open adoption, it's really an identified adoption. When they meet before the birth of the baby, they will discuss and hopefully agree upon the level of openness that will continue after the birth and adoption. And that can range anywhere from a letter and a photo once a year to a letter and a photo once a month, and all the way to the top, the smallest amount, is where they agree on actually meeting, as we saw in this picture here, where the birth mother becomes sort of an extended family member and the child actually grows up knowing his birth mother, or sometimes birth parents and the whole extended family.